Hello and welcome to Across Africa. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Biahi with our weekly look at the stories from across the continent. Coming up in the show, a matter of urgency. The UN declares that parts of South Sudan are experiencing famine and warns that by July, half of the population will be without a reliable source of food. Polisario Front officials blame Morocco after a UN envoy to the disputed Western Sahara quits after years of trying to resolve a standoff over the territory. And brushing aside gender stereotypes and even militant threats, we meet one female Algerian international who let nothing get in her way of the love of the game. In South Sudan, the United Nations warns that hundreds of thousands of people are facing starvation as the world's newest nation experiences famine. Well, the UN estimates that by July, 50% of the population will be without a reliable source of food. Aid agencies are making airdrops in the worst-hit parts.
After days of waiting, the UN plane finally arrived. It airdropped food aid in Leah County, one of the two areas in South Sudan's unity state classified as being in famine.
I've been here for 4 days in order to receive food. Today I finally got my food and I'm very happy.
The UN's World Food Programme says 100,000 people face starvation in the counties of Leah and Mayendit.
WFP is delivering now 259 metric ton, which is a full ration for 1 month of the three major commodities, that is cereal, pulses and vegetable oil, plus the CSB++, which is distributed to the children aged 6 to 59 months for combating malnutrition.
The United Nations say they still need more donor money and underline that providing food aid cannot be a short-term project.
It's really urgent and important that we be able to get in there month after month after month so we can keep assisting people and try and help them regain their strength.
The famine is largely man-made. War has totally disrupted agriculture in this country where most people are farmers. South Sudan became independent in 2011. But 2 years later, it plunged into civil war when President Salva Kiir fired his deputy, Riek Machar. A peace deal was signed in 2015, but fighting resumed last year. Hundreds of thousands of people fled their homes, and many others now face starvation.
Next, officials from the disputed Western Sahara have pointed the finger at Morocco after a UN envoy to the territory quit. American Christopher Ross resigned this week after 8 years of trying to resolve the dispute. Morocco insists the Western Sahara is part of its kingdom, but the Algeria-based Polisario Front wants a referendum on self-determination. Lauren Besticker has the details.
A former Spanish colony, Western Sahara was annexed by Morocco in 1975. The move was met with fierce resistance from the Polisario Front, a local armed group that called for the region's independence. Clashes between the two sides saw Rabat build a massive defensive wall in the 1980s, effectively dividing the region. A UN-brokered truce backed by peacekeeping mission MINUSRO took effect in 1991. The United Nations also called for a referendum on the territory's future. The idea was rejected by Morocco, which offered instead to grant autonomy to the region while keeping it under its control. Negotiations have since stalled, with Rabat repeatedly accusing the UN of being pro-Polisario. Tensions grew in January after both sides massed troops around the contested zone of Guerguerat. The Polisario Front said Morocco had violated the truce by building a road that stretched beyond its defensive wall. Rabat eventually agreed to pull back its troops in late February after being urged to do so by Antonio Guterres, the United Nations' new Secretary General.
In Tunisia's mainly conservative society, domestic violence remains a taboo subject. Many women don't speak out, despite over 50% saying they've experienced physical or mental abuse. Things could all change, though, if a draft law is passed, making it easier for courts to act in such cases. Sandra Lutien and Hamedi Talili report from Tunis.
In an ordinary-looking building in central Tunis, female victims of domestic violence come in search of safety and help. This is the home of the Women's Democratic Association, an NGO dedicated to promoting women's rights.
C'est souvent des récits qui sont très durs à écouter Their stories are often very tough. We ask the women why they came to us and what they expect of us. They often tell us they went to file a complaint, but that the police convinced them not to.
Legal action almost never leads to a conviction. Despite that, around 4,000 women have come here in the hope of getting legal aid. But first, they meet with psychologist Sherifat Lili. Her job is to listen to their stories of violence.
She feels alone and isolated, so it's easier for him to control her. When a woman is abused, she doesn't talk on the first day. And when she does, people tell her maybe it's your fault, maybe you did something. So she won't talk. She'll be ashamed and afraid to say, I was abused, my husband assaults me.
Some find themselves completely isolated. Others are on the run. For those with nowhere to go, the BT NGO has turned what was once an abandoned building into a shelter that can house up to 30 women and children.
This is the room of one of our residents. Our first goal is to protect the woman, and then we work with her on how she can rebuild her life. It's only a temporary shelter. What's important is that they are self-sufficient and independent once they leave.
A draft law is currently being debated in the country's parliament. If passed, the law would make it easier for judges to issue restraining orders, while police would be taught how to deal with victims of domestic violence.
Let's meet Fatiha next, an Algerian international who plays for the all-women football club Afak Relizani. Well, for the 26-year-old and her teammates, the love of the game is more important than gender stereotypes and even militant threats in the conservative nation.
Training for a League Cup game in Relizan, west of the Algerian capital. The Afak Relizan women's team was launched in 1997 during the country's civil war, back when armed Islamists prohibited all women's sports. But the team's coach and its players refused to be intimidated.
I had a conversation with the players to ask them if they wanted to keep playing in spite of the threat. They decided to play on. They said if women took up arms during the war for independence, so could they. They wanted to fight that threat and keep playing.
26-year-old Fatia also plays for the national team, like 5 of the club's other players. The war may be over, but she says they still face social stigma in the conservative yet football-mad North African country.
Everywhere in Algeria, people have a problem with women playing football. Sometimes when we're playing away and they see us in our football jerseys, they curse and insult us. But others are curious and ask questions. Like here in Relizan, they tell us that our success brings them pride more than the men's team.
Some of the girls succumb to pressure to hang up their boots after marriage, but others are determined to play on.
They tell us, why don't you get married? Why aren't you in the kitchen? A woman is made to stay in the kitchen. But I'm just playing football. I'm not doing anything wrong. Their words can't hurt me. I know I'm not doing anything wrong in the eyes of God.
In recent years, the club's women's team has won multiple domestic and regional tournaments. Despite their runaway success, the players are unpaid, and the club helps them find work on the side. They're awarded only $12 for every game won, and few locals travel to games. The squad also has no sponsor or external financing, surviving only on passion for the beautiful game.
And finally, her ancestors used dung and soil to colour their homes, but artist Esther Malangu was one of the first to begin painting traditional Ndembele designs in bright acrylics on canvas. Now 81, the internationally recognised South African has every intention of continuing her work to preserve and promote her culture.
Internationally renowned for painting in her signature Ndebele style, 81-year-old Esther Mahlangu has no intention of slowing down. She started painting when she was just 10 years old, a tradition passed down through generations of Ndebele women. Her skills have since taken her around the world.
When I returned, I went from door to door, encouraging people to send their children to me to learn to paint. A lot of them showed a lot of enthusiasm. They will only come in the afternoon, after school. Now some of them have become really good.
Her forebears used only dung and soil to colour their work, which adorned their homes. But Esther was one of the first to start painting these traditional designs in bright acrylic paints and on canvas. When the art that decorated her home was noticed by French art researchers, she was invited to put on a show in France in 1986.
When I got there, I was surprised to see a replica of my house there. They had built exactly the same house for me to paint. But it didn't have thatch on the roof, it had an aluminium roof. It even had the courtyard in front. It was exactly the same house.
Esther was the first African and the first woman to be invited to participate in a prestigious art car collection in 1991, keeping tradition alive in innovative ways.
It feels wonderful. As a people, we must learn to appreciate our traditions. What I don't want people to exploit our culture. People must learn from each other. That's what I want.
Esther remains a leader in preserving and promoting African art and culture. Most recently, she has adapted sketches made by Nelson Mandela, reimagining them in her own inimitable style.
Well, that's all from your Across Africa team for this week. Don't forget, though, every weekday at 9:45 you can tune in to Eye on Africa right here on France 24. Do stay tuned.